Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot tell me that the ANC has not been to 50 million different conferences and said, please guys, will you not invest in South Africa? And they all said, no. And they all asked, why? They said, BEE. And so, in a bid to curb BEE, or at least water it down, the ANC have come out with a brand new act. So, with that all being said, we've got some new BEE rules. Now, if you read the lamestream media, we should all panic and we should all go bust because, BEE, transformation, terrible, terrible, terrible thing. But Ramon and I have actually had the displeasure of reading the act, and it's not really as bad as we think. Is it, Ramon?
No, in fact, I thought it was really bad, right? I actually had a tweet that I had to delete about this particular act, and I called the president an awful name, but he is still the awful name. But anyway, I had to delete that tweet because you called me and said, Ramon, have you read the actual act properly? And I said, yes, I did. But then I found out that I actually haven't. And in essence, ladies and gentlemen, what this amendment bill or act now has done to BEE is to basically curb stomp it and basically kick it out of the business world for like 90% of businesses in South Africa. Now, Byron has all the minute details about how that actually works. But what you need to understand from this video is that this new BEE Amendment Act is actually very good news, not bad news.
Let's actually consider what the existing BEE rules are. So underneath the existing BEE rules, your company has to be BEE compliant if you do one of two things. Either one will trigger the BEE compliance. The first is you employ more than 50 people. The second is your annual turnover, that's not profit, that's turnover, exceeds 25 million, which means that if you're not so much a small enterprise, more a medium enterprise, you do have to comply with BEE. Now, a lot of people highlighted this as a potential flaw or a barrier to the government. And so what the government did in terms of the Amendment Act is it said, okay, we hear you, we want you to adopt forms of transformation. And so what we will do is we will simplify the regulations. How we will do that is we will drop the turnover requirement. So if your employment exceeds 50 people or above, you must comply with BEE. And those targets of what that BEE compliance will look like will be set by the relevant minister. So that's the Commie Minister of Employment and Labour. So the Commie can turn around and tell you how many members of a certain demographic you should employ. However, the annual turnover requirement disappeared. So in effect, if you want to now avoid BEE, there is actually a really easy way to do it. And that is, don't employ more than 50 people. You can have a business of 100 trillion a year. Who cares? Happy days. Don't employ more than 50 people. And that's going to be the key here, which means that if we actually apply the rules properly, you may say any company now that actually follows BEE is doing it by choice, because the ability to avoid BEE is actually in the act. Now, your answer to us may be, yeah, but you guys are nitpicking and trying to avoid the act, and you just kind of try to skirt things, and that's not cool. Well, actually, the act does say that the rules were put in place to make compliance easier. And so they actually apparently included this into the act as a deliberate thing.
Because if you look at clause 1 of the act itself, it specifically says, and I quote, they have removed schedule 4 of the previous BE Act, and I quote, this is intended at reducing the regulatory burden on small employers in relation to regulatory provisions in line with chapter 3 of the previous BE Act. So essentially what the ANC has done, ladies and gentlemen, is by removing the turnover requirement for BE and only having the number of staff requirement being 50, you can have a company of 100 billion rand turnover a year. You can split it up into as many companies as you want, as long as they're all under 50 employees. And BE does not jolt your right testicle from your left testicle ever. Now, my friends, and Byron, of course, this is a huge step forward in basically making BEE completely irrelevant to 90% of businesses in South Africa. It's like a huge step forward, and who knew we would be saying that in light of an ANC law, but that's what we're actually saying. This is a great act if you read it properly.
Yeah, so obviously everybody will panic and go, oh, the government gets to arbitrarily put a clause in there and tell you how many people you should employ. The usual Karens will say that without actually bothering to read the act. And that may be true, but only if you exceed the threshold, which you have 50 people or above. So who exactly will this act actually apply to? Well, the answer should be very clear to you, ladies and gentlemen, and that is multinationals, corporates, and possibly industries that have to have large numbers of employees, such as the mining sector. However, you may say, right guys, you guys are full of shit, right? I mean, that's not entirely true. And I would rebut that, and we will use an example from last year, which is Dis-Chem. For those of you who may not recall, Dis-Chem had a massive, huge debacle, whereby they wrote a sectoral type letter to everybody saying, everybody in the business, we need this many bean counterings, and therefore let's just fire a load of whiteys. Do you remember that, Ramon?
Well, in their defense, they said no more hiring of whiteys.
Anyway, Discam lost a shitload of money and Discam did subsequently withdraw their statements. But you may say to us, okay, well, how would that apply? How would BEE be avoided by a company as large as Discam? And the question I would pose you is there an individual store that Discam has that has more than 50 employees? I struggle to believe that there is.
Indeed, and for more on this, stick with us because here is a quick word from our sponsor, SatStacker. If you look at Bitcoin right now, the exchanges are crashing all over the place. Let us not even talk about the bank runs happening in America, and the central banks are printing money faster than ever. Of course, Bitcoin actually fixes this, but it only fixes it if you actually have Bitcoin in your own personal wallets, which is why we support Bitvice, the sponsor of this video. Because Bitvice is the only company where you buy Bitcoin from and they deposit it directly into your personal wallet. So in essence, your Bitcoin is with you, fully in your control and fully safe from any external activity. It's a bit like having gold in your own safe rather than having it somewhere else. And to make it even easier for you to buy Bitcoin, they now have a product called SatStacker, which allows you to buy Bitcoin on a weekly or monthly basis, just like a simple debit order. You buy the Bitcoin, it gets deposited directly into your private wallet. So Bitvice is by far the best way and easiest way and safest way to accumulate Bitcoin. So head on over to bitvice.io to set up your account or just click the link in the description below. And we are back. And Byron, you make a very interesting point about even the corporates maybe not really needing to fall under this act. Because if a corporate, if they have one holding company and it has 1,000 people, yes, this act will apply to it. But for all its subsidiaries and other companies associated with that corporation, they can just break those up into various different companies, have 49 employees in each, and also they wouldn't have BEE attached to it. And Discam, who learned a very valuable lesson last year, maybe now they realize that all that debacle was for nothing, really. They misread the act like I did at the time.
So what you could effectively do is, as I was saying, is there an actual Discam store, an individual one with more than 50 employees? Well, I struggle to believe that there is. So how you would avoid the act, how you would restructure your business, put it that way, is you would cut every store into an individual company. And every company would have individual employees, and those companies would all feed into a head office or a group company. So you would effectively have, rather than one overall holding company, you've had lots of smaller subsidiary companies that feed into a holding company, with each individual business not exceeding 50 people. You see, it can be done. Okay, look, you may say, oh, but then there's more compliance and all sorts of other things. I'd rather have more compliance and be able to say fuck off to the act than not, right? To actually have to just give away parts of my business. And so what does that actually mean in practicalities? Well, what it actually means in practicalities, ladies and gentlemen, is that Elon Musk said he could not set up Starlink in South Africa because he didn't want to give away some of his business. Well, Elon Musk now can set up Starlink. He can do whatever the fuck he wants, so long as he doesn't exceed the 50 employee mark. So how would it actually get its work? How would it get a subcontract? Well, the answer is easy. Create the subcontractors yourself and create individual company to provide you with the services yourself. It's very clear, which is why at the start of the video we then said any corporate that now chooses to follow BE does it by choice. Any corporate worth its shred will have the money to be able to pay a consultant to figure out how to actually restructure the business so that it is compliant without being compliant, if you know what I mean, Ramon.
No, exactly. So in essence, the ANC has completely sort of destroyed BE for the most part. Okay, the other parts of the act does say that if you are a designated employer, i.e. over 50 people or employees, the Minister of Labour can set regulations or requirements for your particular sector. But it is so easy not to be a designated employer, i.e. over 50 people, that those regulations don't actually apply to you in any case. So you're giving a lot of power to the Minister of Labour for diversity and transformation, but your choice to be part of the diversity and transformation group in their sector is actually very easy to negate. So there's a huge, I'm not going to call it a loophole, but essentially there's a huge gap where this doesn't apply to you at all, irrespective of the size of your company. Mining and a few other things being excluded from that, of course, but this has gutted BE completely from everyday South African life. 90% of companies are small and medium enterprises. Many, I think the far majority of companies have less than 50 employees in them. What's the bad news, Byron? Because I'm struggling to find it.
Yeah, and to be frank, so am I. I suppose the only parties that really get impacted by this are the large corporates, the banks, the big insurance companies, those kind of entities that perhaps may struggle to break their business up into smaller entities. But actually, if you think about it, I still maintain, and we discussed this prior to recording, I still maintain this may be a bit of a red herring by the ANC. Because what the ANC may do is they know that everybody's going to do this. They're not stupid. They've got how many years with BE experience? They know that people will come out and figure out ways to get around the rules. You cannot tell me they drafted the rules not knowing that this is what would happen. But I think that what they will do is at the end of their term, they will say, right, guys, you know what? We are responsible for creating twice as many new companies while we were in office. Aren't we great? What they're not actually telling you is just people restructured their business and they created call. The moral of the story here, ladies and gentlemen, is in the state that applies BE as strictly as we do, BE is basically dead because the ANC has given us a loophole out of it. And all we have to do is just restructure our entities slightly smarter. And if you do that, you can say fuck off to BE for the rest of the time.
Yeah, and importantly, the loophole's not like some weird hole in the dark that you have to look for. The loophole's like a bright red sign. It's like, this is how BE doesn't apply to you, and just follow that particular sign. So, I mean, we spoke a lot of shit about Cyril Ramaphosa on this channel, but Byron, maybe his legacy as a president of South Africa is he has destroyed BEE for the majority of businesses in this country. And for that, maybe we should be quite thankful. That is his legacy, and that's the legacy that he'll be known for, one hopes.
One can hope. Well, obviously, a lot of individuals will look at this and see this as being a really bad negative thing because in South Africa, the sun never shines, the shit never stops flowing. So the reality of the situation is everybody will see this as doom and gloom. But what they don't actually do is they don't look at this from a practicality point of view. Be practical with your applications. You may sit there going, haha, you guys are just trying to be smart. They'll clog this hole up. Well, according to the minister, they did this deliberately. This was there to help us be more compliant with the Act. And if I think about it from a corporate risk perspective, there is a degree of logic to this because if I break my entity up into smaller entities, I'm more resilient. I can change suppliers quickly. I can do things and not have to worry about different sectors of my business going bust or not being economical. There is actually a logical element to doing this. And so from that element, if you really think about it, maybe that was the minister's idea, right? He's trying to make us just think a little bit more digitally about our businesses.
But also, most importantly, there are various sort of tax implications for this as well, because you can have businesses with the same directors, all under 50 employees, and you can have like loan schemes set up between the businesses, really deplete your tax obligation on several businesses. So I don't know if they thought about it that far, but breaking up your business and being decentralized as a business is actually very good in and of itself. And this is basically forcing you to do it, which is great. The ANC is basically building decentralized businesses in South Africa through this act. Thumbs up from me.
Absolutely. And if you really stop to think about it for 1 second, as we're saying, it's kind of like, right, the ANC can't actually go and legislate against this because the ANC can't tell me who I should employ with or what businesses I should be involved in. Like that's what happens when you live in a free country. They cannot regulate those things. And so the moral of the story here, ladies and gentlemen, is that BEE is dead. And to a degree, you cannot tell me that the president didn't know he was signing his death warrant. Because the reality of the situation is, as we said at the start of this video, you cannot tell me he hasn't been to how many conferences, and they've all said to him, you need to get rid of it. And to a degree, the ANC can't, because it has embedded the idea of transformation and BEE into its DNA to a point where it cannot be separated. So how do you get rid of it without getting rid of it? And the answer is, you enhance it, right? You enhance it to the point of where it doesn't actually apply. And that's exactly what they've done. And so they will say, but we've given all the power to the government. Yeah, they have. To those entities who choose to follow the rules. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the takeaway from the video. To those who try to follow the rules. And if you work for an entity that's like, we must follow these rules, just remember, compliance with those rules were choice. They weren't mandated.